The goal of this video is to explain to you a method for studying for tests, or more specifically, for getting ready to study for tests. To that end, it presupposes that you have been to class and that while you were in class you have taken notes. This video will explain a basic method for turning your notes into something you can study. We'll call it a study plan. To start, whenever you are taking a test of some kind, you are only ever being tested on one of three things. Those are a skill, information, or understanding. Skill is pretty simple and straightforward. It is your ability to do something, and the best way to prepare for a test of skill is to simply practice the skill over and over again, trying to do it correctly. While this task might be difficult, no one really finds it confusing in and of itself, and so this video will not focus on it immediately. However, the difference between information and understanding is not as transparent. Essentially, the difference between these two is one of scale. Information is small and understanding is big. Information is the nitty-gritty details like King James died in 1625, whereas understanding is the broad brushstrokes grasp of what is going on, like seeing the place of King James's death in the line of succession of English monarchy. Information is the close-up. Understanding is the whole picture. Information is the tree, and understanding is the forest. The way to study information is generally boring, like most hyper-detailed work, but still pretty straightforward. You just have to memorize it. But in order to do that, you have to get it into a format that you can memorize. The tried and true method for doing this is flashcards. Flashcards work well for studying information because you break the material up into small, easy-to-digest pieces, and because they require you to do what you will be actually doing on the test, reading information, and then recalling related information without necessarily seeing it. In order to make flashcards, you have to go through your notes and find all the pieces of information that you simply need to know. You take a piece of information, maybe a question, a vocabulary word, or the name of a person, and place it on one side of the card, and then put the related piece of information, the answer, definition, or action of the person, on the other. When you are going through your notes, it might be a good idea to make a list of the flashcards you are going to create on a piece of paper, separating them by question marks, colons, or hyphens, so that you can edit them before actually making the cards. This list is the first part of your study plan. When studying flashcards, you read one side of them and then try to remember what is on the other side. Notice I didn't say guess, because if you really know the information well, there will be no guessing about it. It is even helpful to do them backward to really cement the information. Sometimes there are a number of pieces of information that all fit together in one group, where one side of your flashcard would just have one thing written on it. The other side would have 3, 4, 5. If this is the case, chances are in your notes you have made a list, and memorizing the information in a list will be a helpful way to study it. To do this, you go through your notes looking for groups of information and then write them out in your study plan as a list. You will want to put a heading on your list, which tells you why the information goes together, and then put the list of information underneath it. Remember to make sure that if there is an order to it, you put it in the right order. When you're done, you'll have a list of lists. An easy way to study a list is simply to say it over and over again in your head, starting with the first word, and then saying the next word with the first. So in our list, it would look something like this. Chickens. Chickens, cows. Chickens, cows, horses. Chickens, cows, horses, and sheep. Alternatively, you can write the list over and over again until you can write it down from memory. Understanding, however, is not as easy to learn and keep. Teachers often ask themselves how they can get their students to really understand something, and for that understanding to stay with them. And in the end of the day, they often throw their hands up, though many don't want to admit it. The reason why this is so difficult is because students just have to see it. They have to have a eureka moment, and that is not as simple as memorizing a date or a name. That being said, you will have to learn larger concepts in order to do well on certain tests. And these concepts will not be broken down into unconnected, easy-to-manage pieces. Given that fact, I offer two methods. The first is to recognize that understanding is really nothing more than seeing the connections between different pieces of information. Since if you've already done the first two things in the study plan, you will already have a large group of flashcards. One thing you could do is simply write out the connections between those flashcards. For the sake of giving this a name, I call it logical connections. For example, if one of your flashcards defined moral responsibility, and another one of your flashcards defined when moral responsibility accrues, then one logical connection between these two is that the first flashcard defines a term that's found in the second one. Additionally, if the definition of when moral responsibility accrues is when you obey or disobey your conscience, and two other terms that you're defining are guilt and sin, a logical connection between those two terms and when moral responsibility accrues is that those things relate to the second half of when moral responsibility accrues, namely, when you disobey your conscience. Once you have those logical connections, you can try to memorize them. Or perhaps it would be better to simply meditate on them, because what you're trying to do is basically get the connections between the information to seep into your soul. If that doesn't work, or for groups of information that are not easily broken up into small pieces or lists, you might do better to put the information into a paragraph. This is because in order to write a coherent paragraph, you have to take a series of small bits of information and string them together in an order that makes sense. This is very hard to do if you've only memorized the information, but have not really ever understood it. To get this understanding to sink into you, you should try to write the paragraph in your own words, without needing to look at it. When you can do that, you hopefully will understand what you wrote and remember your understanding. Additionally, in certain humanities classes, there might be a passage of text that you're going to be asked about. The best way to deal with those is to mark up the passages. This means to underline or highlight or otherwise mark those sections that are important so that they stand out to you, and then to write somewhere else why those sections are important. To study them, you should read through the passages a few times before taking the test. That is, if they're short enough, so that the sections stick in your head. You can also treat those sections and your explanation of why they're important like they belong in one of the categories above, and study them like you would those. Finally, and this is one of the best parts, the very act of making this study plan, even if you don't use it, has certain benefits. First, organizing your notes will make them stick in your head, and will allow you to see the connections between them, thus building your understanding. But, coming full circle, it is also good because of the skills it develops. At academic schools, in good classes at least, there is really only one skill that is always being tested. That is the ability to apply information. In order to do that, you need to be able to analyze the information that is given to you and pull out what is important and see what information you already know needs to be added to what is given to change it into what it needs to be. That is precisely the skill that going over your notes like this will build, and it will make you better at taking the tests themselves. As always, thanks for listening and good luck.